$240 million. That is how much capital flowed into a single autonomous tractor startup over 7 years, enough to reshape American agriculture, or so the pitch promised. Monarch Tractor was founded in 2018 with a thesis that felt inevitable: electric, autonomous machinery purpose-built for the modern farm. By 2024, investors had pushed its valuation past $500 million. The company had secured partnerships with major agricultural cooperatives, a minority stake from CNH Industrial, and collaborations spanning from Verizon Business to Dairy Farmers of America. On paper, it looked like a category-defining company. Then the field went quiet. Within months of that peak valuation, Monarch ceased operations entirely. Its core technology was acquired by Caterpillar, according to Bloomberg. An Idaho equipment dealer filed suit alleging $773,000 in defective machines that allegedly failed to perform the autonomous functions they were sold to deliver. 7 years of development. 0 tractors still operating under the company's name. The numbers do not add up, and that is precisely the point. This is not a story about a bad idea. Autonomous electric tractors are not a flawed concept. This is a story about the distance between a compelling vision and a product that actually works in a field, in the rain, under load, at scale. $240 million crossed that distance. It was not enough. To understand how that happens, you have to look at the founders who believed Silicon Valley logic could be transplanted into American soil. Founded in 2018, Monarch Tractor assembled a founding team that on paper looked exactly right for the problem. A Silicon Valley engineer with deep autonomy experience, a veteran of Tesla's manufacturing operations, and Carlo Mondavi, a name carrying genuine weight in California wine country, who understood specialty crop agriculture not as a market segment, but as a lived reality. The problem they were solving was real. American farm labor was aging and increasingly scarce. Diesel dependency was drawing regulatory pressure, and specialty crop agriculture, vineyards, orchards, row crops requiring precision, demanded a level of operational control that legacy equipment was never designed to deliver. Their answer was the MKV, a 40-horsepower, fully electric, autonomous tractor built specifically for vineyards and specialty crops. Priced at up to $100,000 per unit, it was not a mass-market machine. It was a precision instrument for a high-value segment willing to pay for performance. Early institutional validation followed. CNH Industrial, one of the largest agricultural equipment manufacturers on the planet, took a minority stake. That is not a symbolic gesture. When a legacy equipment giant writes a check, it signals that engineers and operators with decades of field experience see something technically credible. The timing reinforced the conviction. EV momentum was accelerating. Agtech investment cycles were peaking. The regulatory and labor pressures driving demand were not hypothetical. They were already reshaping farm economics across California. The team was credible. The market was real. The money was institutional. What could go wrong? By 2024, Monarch's valuation had crossed $500 million. That number did not emerge from audited revenue or proven unit economics. It emerged from a partnership stack carefully assembled to signal that the market had already decided. AGI brought distribution infrastructure. Dairy Farmers of America connected Monarch to one of the largest agricultural cooperatives in the country. Verizon Business added connectivity credibility, the kind of enterprise-grade association that implies operational scale. Each partner amplified the last. Together, they constructed a picture of deep market penetration that the actual deployment numbers could not yet support. Government incentives became load-bearing elements of the sales architecture. USDA grants and state-level subsidies were actively promoted to help farmers absorb a $100,000 price tag. The subsidy layer was not incidental. It was structural, a mechanism to compress the adoption barrier while the product was still maturing. The valuation logic rested on a single, unstated assumption: that autonomous operation was a solved problem. not a development target, not an engineering milestone still in progress, a solved problem. Investors were pricing Monarch as though the gap between prototype and production-ready field performance had already been closed. The media framing reinforced it. Monarch was positioned as the Tesla of tractors, a comparison that collapsed the distance between a compelling demonstration and a machine that performs reliably in mud, under load, across a full growing season. The scaffolding looked like a structure, but at least one customer in Idaho was already learning the difference between the tractor in the pitch deck and the one sitting in their field. In October, an Idaho-based equipment dealer filed suit against Monarch Tractor. The claim was specific, and the numbers were precise. 10 MKV units, $773,000 invested, and a product that allegedly failed to deliver the autonomous operation it was sold to perform. The dealer's complaint named two core failures. The tractors could not operate autonomously as represented. They could not be used in indoor environments as marketed. These were not peripheral features. Autonomous capability was the entire justification for a $100,000 price point. That pricing logic only holds under one condition: the autonomous system works. Strip that out, and what remains is an electric tractor in a market already served by cheaper, proven alternatives. The premium was not for the hardware. It was for the intelligence the hardware was supposed to carry. When that intelligence failed to perform in real operating conditions, the value proposition did not bend. It collapsed. This is where the strategic blind spot becomes visible. Monarch had constructed a valuation narrative around autonomous capability, while that capability remained insufficiently validated outside controlled demonstrations. The partnership stack, the government incentives, the enterprise collaborations, all of it was priced as though field-ready autonomy was already delivered. The Idaho lawsuit was the first public evidence that it was not. One dealer, 10 machines, $773,000. The number is not large relative to $240 million raised, but lawsuits are not just financial instruments, they are disclosures. Once the legal action surfaced, the internal pressure that had been building for months became impossible to contain. What followed was a rapid and public unraveling. The unraveling moved fast. In the months that followed the legal action, Monarch laid off nearly its entire workforce. The California headquarters was abandoned. 7 years of operations compressed into a controlled retreat that the company's public communications framed as something else entirely. Monarch called it a transition, a pivot from manufacturing to a software-defined vehicle platform and technology licensing model. The language was deliberate. It suggested strategic evolution rather than operational failure, a reframe that obscured the actual scale of what had just happened. The distinction matters. A pivot implies choice. What Monarch executed was a wind-down dressed in forward-looking language. The tractors stopped shipping. The facilities closed. The people left. What remained was intellectual property. The perception stack, the electrification systems, the software-defined vehicle platform that had absorbed 7 years and $240 million to build. That IP had a buyer. Bloomberg reported Caterpillar as the acquirer of Monarch's core technology assets. Caterpillar has the manufacturing scale, the distribution infrastructure, and the global dealer network that Monarch never possessed. The technology that could not survive inside a startup may yet reach the fields it was designed for, just under a different name, inside a different machine. That is the uncomfortable residue of this collapse. The technology outlived the company. The perception stack works well enough for a global equipment manufacturer to acquire it. Countless people lost their jobs. Farmers who believed in the product lost their investment, and the core asset moved on. 7 years built something. It just could not build a business. What that distinction cost, and whether it was avoidable, is where this story finally lands. The failure mechanism here is precise enough to name. Monarch did not collapse because autonomous farming is a flawed thesis. Caterpillar's acquisition confirms the technology had real value. Monarch collapsed because the company priced and valued itself as though the hardest engineering problem had already been solved, before it had been solved in production conditions, at scale, under real operating stress. That is the autonomy premium trap, a valuation structure that requires the most difficult capability to be delivered first, before the business can justify what investors already paid for it. The post-mortem chain is clean. The premise was sound. Autonomous farming is a large and legitimate market. Escalation followed logically. A minority stake from CNH Industrial, government incentives compressing adoption barriers. But CNH's involvement was a credibility signal, not a product validation. A legacy manufacturer's minority stake does not mean the machine works at scale. It means someone credible believed it might. The hidden fragility was always there. Autonomous capability was not production validated. The trigger was an Idaho dealer, 10 machines, and a lawsuit that turned an internal engineering gap into a public disclosure. The fallout was a shuttered headquarters and $240 million that did not survive to commercialization. The lesson is a sequencing rule. Hardware startups must validate core capability before expanding valuation. Government incentives and partnership announcements can manufacture demand before supply is ready. That gap does not stay hidden. Caterpillar now holds 7 years and $240 million produced. The technology survived. The company did not. So when the next autonomous tractor startup raises its first institutional round, who is responsible for making sure the machine actually works before the valuation says it does?